Water in Martin County, Florida is as important as anything. Like the air you breathe, the water here is the life source for so many seeking a piece of South Florida's paradise. From recreation and relaxation to commercial industry and economic influence, the water is ingrained as a way of life. The clear water and ultimate sunshine bring visitors from across the globe to the Treasure Coast in search of their perfect getaways. Those beautiful sunrises and year-round warm breezes lead to paddleboard adventures and those wanting to see the way Florida once was. Martin County has largely maintained its old Florida charm over the years, county leaders keeping growth slow so as not to be overrun by condos and mega resorts. The 4-story height limit here for sure creates a sense of how things used to be. But the water is certainly not how it used to be. A century of development for people flocking south has turned the once natural flow of water in the region into a series of man-made canals, dikes, and ditches. Water being rerouted to serve man's interests. These man-made ways of moving water have created man-made problems for those depending on it. To understand the issues that face us, we must look back to understand how we got here so that we can move forward to protect our paradise. Florida was largely uninhabited 150 years ago. Native American tribes lived off the land, but did not drastically alter it. Most of Florida was essentially a swamp. The river of grass, as the Everglades were often referred to, stretched from what is now the Orlando area all the way south to Florida Bay. The water naturally flowing south at a very slow pace of a quarter mile a day. That slow journey to get to the sea was Mother Nature's way of holding, filtering, and cleaning its most valuable resource.
It was significantly different in terms of, the environment was, stable. The water sheet flowed over large, vast areas, and the human population was insignificant to the size of the floodplains and everything else.
When developers started making their way to Florida, it was quickly realized that the land was too wet and needed to be drained. Building a series of ditches, dikes, canals, and culverts proved to be the quickest and most efficient way to move water away from the land so that it could be developed by its newest human inhabitants.
So if you create a low spot where the water can channelize out to tide, it is very effective at reducing water table. And so even in areas where you don't have a direct water connection, you're draining land to make it purposeful for whatever man would like to do with it.
The construction of this new drainage system was very successful. The land dried out and water sent away. But what engineers at the time could have never known was the long-lasting effects of this artificial system and the negative consequences that future generations would be dealing with.
By making those changes, we not only changed the way water exists with us and how it exists on the land, but we also changed the content of the water, because when you develop land or when you change the land use from its natural state, it changes the permeability, so less water goes into the aquifer and less of it gets treated through those natural processes.
Lake Okeechobee, named by the Seminole Indian tribe meaning big water, was always an issue for early development. The lake, during heavy rain events, would naturally flood its low banks the way Mother Nature intended. But when people started moving in and farming on the nearby fertile land, that lake needed to be tamed. Hurricanes in 1926 and 1928 proved to be a tipping point for water managers in South Florida. After thousands of people died and millions of dollars of damages, the public was very quick to support construction of improved levees and canals. After major flooding of its banks, which the lake had always done, but this time with humans in the way, Congress authorized the construction of the Herbert Hoover Dike. The 730 square mile lake would have an earthen dam built around it. The lake was essentially turned into an impoundment. 5,000 square miles of watershed flow into Lake Okeechobee, but that lake now would have a wall around it. Officials knew from the beginning that to protect people and homes around the lake, there had to be an outlet. The lake needed some drains.
If you have an impoundment that takes on water 6 times faster than you can get rid of it, you have to have some outlet for it, or eventually it's going to exceed the limits of that impoundment and create lots of issues.
The C-43 to the west and the C-44 canal to the east were built to give Lake Okeechobee water a place to go. Now water from the Big Lake would discharge out unnaturally to the west and east through Martin County and eventually into the St. Lucie estuary. As the region north of the lake increased in population, so did water quality issues. As homes were built, septic systems put in, concrete and asphalt roadways constructed, and lawn fertilizer began getting used, the watershed changed. There was no longer naturally free-flowing clean water coming into Lake Okeechobee. The water had been polluted by man, and that water began heading straight for Martin County.
The state and the federal government went to great lengths to manage water such that you had developable dry land for agriculture and for living, and we figured out sometime later that we can't just get rid of it as a nuisance. We have to regard it as a resource.
Local officials realized early on that the water being discharged from the lake was not so good. A Stewart News article from 1961 reports on a letter sent by the Martin County Commission to the Governor of Florida and the Corps of Engineers, among others, that asked to stop or slow down the releases. The article in part reads, quote, "These discharges pollute Martin County's naturally clear tidewaters, deposit widespread mudflats and shoals, restrict boating navigation, destroy marine life, and seriously injure recreational facilities, which are the mainstay of the county's tourist industry, with cumulative damages of millions of dollars to coastal communities." Back then, there were about 3 million people living in the region. Today, there are 8. Martin County is positioned geographically in a very unique place. Near the Atlantic Gulf Stream and right in the middle of where fresh and saltwater meet is a very special estuary.
It is profoundly unique and special, and it does, I think the best way to say it puts an exclamation point on our need that should exist anyway. The need to make sure we balance our use with it with our preservation of it, because we need it.
The north and south fork of the St. Lucie River mix with water from the Indian River Lagoon and seawater from the St. Lucie Inlet to make this one of the most biodiverse areas in the entire United States. The 4,000 plant and animal species here depend on a delicate balance of fresh and salt water.
This is a catastrophic situation.
But when that balance is thrown off, dramatic changes can occur. Black water and blue-green algae outbreaks in normally crystal clear waters have scientists looking for answers. The problem, they say, is too many nutrients, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus.
Nitrogen and phosphorus, we call them nutrients, and that sounds like a good word. Nutrients are necessary for life.
But too much is trouble.
It becomes a pollutant when it exceeds natural levels.
Nitrogen and phosphorus come from a multitude of sources, like wastewater, animals, and fertilizers. Certain soaps and detergents can carry these harmful elements too. And when too much gets into our water system, it can affect us all. Before development, it would rain and water would naturally absorb into the ground. But today, it has to be routed. And no matter where that raindrop falls in the county, it eventually makes its way to the precious St. Lucie estuary.
All of the land from Lake Okeechobee east to the ocean and north a good bit into St. Lucie County all drains into the St. Lucie estuary, and all that's a significant amount of water that comes through.
Local and state officials realized many years ago that the water heading into the estuary and the Indian River Lagoon was not as clean as it should be.
So the St. Lucie River was designated by the state as an impaired water body because of the pollutants, and largely they're nutrient pollutants that qualified it for that unfortunate status. And what comes with that is a total maximum daily load calculation that is our goal, that we'd like to get those nutrient pollutants back down within that range.
So a cleanup schedule was put in place, a fertilizer ordinance adopted, and Martin County began working to remove significant amounts of these harmful nutrients by 2028, and making water quality projects its highest priority. Martin County's modern-day water story begins in about 1995 after extensive flooding. The county did not have a well-managed drainage system.
One of our challenges has been is that other than the Water Management District, South Florida Water Management District Canal, the C-44 and the C-23 canals, most of our drainage relies upon old farm ditches and canals that drain to the estuaries.
Fixing an aging drainage infrastructure became a priority. As heavy rains continued for several years, it was apparent that the quality of the water from storm runoff needed to be addressed as well.
So during that time after 95 to 2000, then there was some major releases, some of the early algae outbreaks.
The need to treat that stormwater was more apparent than ever. And a key component to treating that water was the creation of strategically located stormwater treatment areas.
This is a stormwater treatment area. This treats the water in this 833-acre basin here.
In southern Martin County, engineers created the Manatee Creek Stormwater Treatment Area.
It uses native wetland vegetation to pull the nutrients, the phosphorus and the nitrogen out of the water prior to discharging to Manatee Pocket and then out into our estuary.
This project is just one of more than 24 stormwater treatment areas, or STAs as they're called, in the county. And you could forgive someone for thinking that they're a park. Their settings created to maximize the natural beauty of the area. They protect neighborhoods from flooding and create habitats for wildlife. But their main function is to clean the water by holding it and letting plants soak up those dangerous nutrients.
The county has been developing these stormwater treatment areas to treat our local basin runoff that goes into the St. Lucian estuary. And actually there's about 75% of local basin discharge that goes into the estuary. So we need to make sure that we treat that basin discharge as well as discharge from Lake Okeechobee.
Since 2001, Martin County has completed 27 stormwater treatment areas and 10 water quality retrofit projects. The county maximizing state and federal grants to turn $85 million of its own money into $350 million worth of projects to meet water quality targets.
But we've already overmet the nitrogen target. We're at 131% of meeting that nitrogen target. It's the phosphorus target that's really hard for us to meet. We're only at 57% right now.
John Mayle, Martin County's Ecosystem Restoration Manager, points to the Tropical Farms neighborhood retrofit as a major success story. The neighborhood was originally zoned for agriculture.
So when you use that same drainage system to accommodate an entirely different land use, you're going to have issues. And the issues were flooding, they were nutrient loading, and that was one of our primary pollutant areas for the St. Lucie River. So the county embarked on a project to create a stormwater treatment area that also included an improvement in conveyance and drainage handling for that neighborhood. So the result of that is you end up with less flooding, you have less inundated septic systems, the water's better managed for living, but then it also goes through a train of treatment processes that simulate the natural process of nutrient removal.
Traditional STAs treat the water naturally, but Martin County also has 2 alternative treatment areas that use a chemical compound to pull out the nitrogen and the phosphorus. At the Danforth Creek Hybrid Wetland Treatment Technology Area, water pulled from Danforth Creek is treated with aluminum sulfate before it is discharged back into the St. Lucie River.
The first cylinder we have here, this is creek water, and you can see there's some color to it, there's some particles in it. This sample I just took a few minutes ago. This is after we add our aluminum sulfate, which is also known as alum. And you can see the alum, when it gets in the water, it starts grabbing hold of the particles, it starts getting larger, it looks sort of like snow. And it'll fall out slowly over time. And after about 10 to 15 minutes, you get what you have in the third cylinder. In the third cylinder here, a lot of the flock has settled out. And then it goes through our wetland system in the back end, and this last cylinder here was taken from our outflow waters.
Cleaning up what flows through these creeks and canals is important work, but even getting the land to build a project on is no small task. Martin County has been successful in acquiring, with its partners, 70,000 acres of land to restore and build projects on. Citizens taxing themselves on 3 different occasions to fund this land acquisition.
And that has gone a long way. So Martin County, I guess, has put its money where its mouth has in terms of doing these projects. That has had a lasting effect.
Allapattah Flats in western Martin County is 20,000 acres of restored marshes and flatwoods that is managed in conjunction with the South Florida Water Management District. It is being restored to its natural state.
It's an area that had a lot of historic wetlands and sloughs that had been dried up for agricultural purposes, and now it's in a state of restoration.
Acquiring land for conservation is an important component to Martin County's cleanup efforts. In the southern part of the county, the Loxahatchee River is undergoing restoration for the opposite reason of the St. Lucie. Because of overly efficient drainage in the basin, there isn't enough fresh water.
The estuary needs a lot more fresh water in the wintertime, but because the water in the summer runs off so quickly, the salt balance in the wintertime is too salty, and it's affecting its estuary and freshwater habitat because there's not enough fresh water. But then in the summertime, it's just blasted out because it gets there too quickly.
The Loxahatchee River is one of only 2 federally designated wild and scenic rivers in the entire state of Florida. So it's completely unique, it's special, it's a huge part of the economy down here. People love that river, all kinds of businesses use it. So it's really important here in Martin County that we preserve and protect the river.
Kitchen Creek is the northern tributary to the Loxahatchee River. The problem, the basin that feeds water into the creek and then into the river was draining too quickly.
The problem with that then is the salt water coming in from the ocean goes up much, much further than it used to. And we've actually lost a lot of the freshwater swamp systems and the river, portions of the river, the freshwater portions of the Loxahatchee River.
The county looked for and found a prime location to build a project on. What was once private and known as the Titilio property was used for many years as a vegetation recycling site. It was basically a dumping ground for yard debris and waste.
So people would come in and bring massive amounts of trees and logs and brush and other things as well too. Stuff like roofing tile material, metal. It was basically, in my opinion, a junkyard.
The county purchased the 51-acre site in 2009 and spent several years redeveloping the land into the Kitchen Creek Central Flowway project, ultimately cleaning up the junkyard and removing 300,000 cubic yards of material. Now the park-like setting has trails and a kayak launch.
So what we've done at this property is we've blocked that water flow, we've blocked that ditch, and we've rerouted the water back into this lake system and wetland system that you can see here, where it can more slowly be filtered and go through the native plants, and eventually it'll work its way down through the property, out through some more wetlands to the south of where we're standing right here, and eventually back down into Kitchen Creek in the river. This property has a benefit to maybe 1,000 acres of watershed. It's not the end of the story. We still need to do more in this watershed, but it's a step. And then once we complete this step, we'll move to the next step. And before you know it, we get closer to restoration.
A similar situation played out in Port Salerno in 2002 when project managers began to create the Salerno Creek Stormwater Retrofit Project. When engineers began digging out the lake, they came across an old dumping ground. Engineers pulled out all kinds of debris, including automobiles that had been buried for decades. Martin County removing all of that unwanted mess to create this beautiful water quality project that immediately relieved chronic street flooding that had plagued the Port Salerno area for years. The project also provides treatment to stormwater runoff prior to being discharged into the Manatee Pocket and ultimately the St. Lucie Estuary. In Jensen Beach and Rio, neighborhoods around Warner Creek were consistently flooding as well. The Warner Creek STA, built in 2012, reduced flooding impacts to homes in the area. Major improvements to the whole Warner Creek area, like this green space and holding pond behind the post office on Savannah Road, provide for picturesque views and stormwater runoff treatment. A total of $8 million being spent in the northern part of the county to treat stormwater before it hits the estuary. In the Golden Gate neighborhood, 12 acres of land were retrofitted for the Golden Gate Water Quality Improvement Project. Now, stormwater runoff from the west portion of the Golden Gate Drainage Basin is now channeled via swales and culverts into the 5-acre STA. The project was completed in 2003. In Palm City, the St. Lucie Shores Water Quality Project, completed in 2017, was built within the All-American Ditch watershed, which was ranked as the most polluted tributary to the St. Lucie River for nitrogen and phosphorus. The 36-acre site and 9-acre lake and STA holds and naturally treats stormwater runoff. Here, scientists have measured that it takes 54 days for water to pass through the system and out to the estuary. The slow travel time for the water gives plants the extra time they need to soak up those excess nutrients. Holding and cleaning stormwater and basin runoff is imperative to a healthy ecosystem, but addressing pollution at its source is even more so. County scientists and engineers realized in the 1980s that discharge from the many package plants around the county was polluting the watershed. A package plant is essentially a small neighborhood wastewater treatment plant. When a neighborhood was built, homes were connected by sewer to these small treatment plants. But as it turned out, these package plants were actually causing more harm than good, as they typically would discharge partially treated effluent into the groundwater. The little package plants were treating the water, but not that well. Phosphorus and nitrogen were leaving these systems and heading into the ground. Beginning in the 1990s, Martin County's Utilities Department began eliminating these package plants. You can see the transformation in this aerial photograph of a former package plant in the town of Ocean Breeze, as all the concrete infrastructure is removed. In all, 70 package plants have been removed, and those neighborhood sewer lines connected to one of the county's larger, more efficient, and safer water treatment plants. But package plants weren't the only thing putting dirty water back into the ground.
Septic tanks, they contribute nitrogen. They are not regarded as a high phosphorus contributor, but they do have the potential to put nitrogen and of course enterococcus, which is fecal bacteria.
Many neighborhoods in the county are on old septic systems. Many of these properties in low-lying areas where the water table is too high.
When you have heavy rains, you have a lot of interface between the water and those septic systems, and that treatment system is not adequate to handle it when you have water mixing with it from the groundwater or from the surface.
Martin County has converted nearly 7,000 septic systems to sewer, and an aggressive plan is underway to spend $150 million to convert 10,000 more septic systems to sewer in the next 10 years.
So there's certainly a desire to remove those septic tanks that are low and close to the water as our highest priority.
The Central Everglades Restoration Plan, or CERP, was authorized by Congress in 2000 as a plan to restore, preserve, and protect the South Florida ecosystem. At a cost of more than $10 billion worth of projects, it is the largest hydrologic project ever undertaken in the United States.
As we realized some of the impacts to the water that our drainage system created, a robust plan was a massive lift by the Corps and the state and local communities and stakeholders to create a plan for trying to restore the natural systems and the water quality that was impacted by the Central and South Florida flood control system.
The plan calls for projects in Martin County's own backyard, and a cornerstone of the plan starts along the banks of the C-44 Canal.
One of the components of the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan was the Indian River Lagoon South project, which includes the C-44 reservoir and stormwater treatment area, which is a massive water storage and treatment facility for stormwater that's intended to treat the watershed of western Martin County that was added to the St. Lucie River as a consequence of the C-44 drainage.
The C-44 Canal, also known as the St. Lucie Waterway, is a major release point for fresh water coming from Lake Okeechobee. It also collects much of the stormwater runoff from Martin County's local watershed. But it has been the discharges when the lake gets too high that in recent years has led to outbreaks of blue-green algae.
Our estuary can just barely handle that on a really wet year, and when you add in Lake Okeechobee runoff, that's what's kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back.
We are in the newly constructed C-44 pump station. We're currently in the pipe gallery with the pumps. They're 22 feet tall.
Scheduled to be completed in 2020, the $500 million C-44 reservoir and stormwater treatment area will be able to take up to 8,000 gallons of water out of the C-44 every second. The water will be sent to a 3,400-acre, 15-foot deep reservoir that can hold 16 billion gallons of water before being released into several STAs.
The whole goal of the project is to try to attenuate the peak flows when they're coming out, being discharged from Lake Okeechobee, so that we can minimize how much water actually makes it to the St. Lucie River. At which point we'll be able to hold the water and clean the water so that when the water that does make it through the system is much cleaner. However, we're going to lose a lot of water to evaporation and seepage.
Martin County putting in $27 million to purchase the 10,000 acres of land the project is being built on. The site near Indiantown is managed by the Army Corps of Engineers and the South Florida Water Management District.
Martin County, when it came to like the SERP and helping the C-44 buying Alapata and those properties, is we used the sales tax dollars as a contribution to that process. So not only were we asking the federal and state government to come in and build these projects that they themselves have designed, but we brought money to help them do it.
Knowing what is in the water and where it is coming from is important for strategizing resources. Martin County has partnered with local agencies like the Ocean Research and Conservation Association and FAU Harbor Branch to gather data through the use of technology. Kilroys and Lobos take real-time water quality measurements 24 hours a day in several locations around Martin County waterways. Partnerships like the one with George Mason University students and Florida Oceanographic Society help bring volunteers to the water to help restore oyster beds. The oysters are an important part of a clean estuary, as one oyster can filter 50 gallons of water a day. Their number is now dwindling due to the changing water conditions.
We're going to talk about your landscape, we're going to talk about septic systems, we're going to talk about stormwater.
Martin County also partners with the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences to present an educational water ambassador series. Residents that want to get involved and make a difference in the community can sign up for these sessions and learn best practices to water management. Getting fact-based information into the hands of residents is essential. Officials make confident decisions only after all factual information has been studied. The county creating the Speak Up for the St. Lucie Facebook page as a landing spot for those seeking fact-based information and wanting to participate in the discussion.
We're always advocating for, at the federal level, for the Indian River Lagoon South projects to keep us on the timeline that was established by the SERP plan.
Elected officials and staff advocating for the river and estuary at every turn.
All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much.
Commissioners in early 2019 drafting a resolution in support of increasing protection of the St. Lucie estuary and northern Everglades. Staff and elected officials participating in the Army Corps of Engineers public scoping meetings on the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual. LOSOM, for short, is the Corps' set of guidelines for when they discharge water out of the lake.
That schedule is very important to us because the more you can store in the lake, the less discharge we can have. The challenge is everybody has their own interest. There's the lake ecology itself, you know, there's the water supply for environment and population south. Ultimately, obviously, from Martin County's perspective, we want no discharges, and that we're looking for a plan that can limit that to the minimum, and we want the lake operated no matter what's constructed so that we get the minimum amount of discharges that's as possible.
But it's not only inside the county's boundaries where work is being done for clean water. Those trips to Washington leading successfully to getting money for projects back home.
While we may be a small county in the state, we're fortunate that we've had both commissioners and many local residents too that are actively involved in the politics, if you will, and that has helped us. They know Martin County, and And because of that, it's assisted us, our voice has been heard, and we've been able to get significant funds for our projects, as well as the results of like the C-44 being one of the larger projects funded for SERP. And part of it is sort of our persistence. We're not going away.
And neither is the demand for clean water and a healthy estuary.
I think that's one exciting part of this time in the next 10 years. We will have a lot of these projects coming on, and we should definitely see some results. Some of the scientists we've had to look at our projects and their success and see the water quality, to also see that our projects are working and actually cleaning up the water.
But there still is more work to do. Martin County has made incredible improvements to its own watershed. Stormwater treatment areas, septic to sewer conversions, oyster bed rehabilitation, and conservation of natural lands are just some of the many things being done. Millions of dollars have been committed to projects identified within the Central Everglades Restoration Plan. But the county is not alone. Everyone is in this together. The lakes and streams are all connected, and everyone needs to do their part to protect our paradise. Martin County is dedicated to working with state and federal partners to clean up our rivers and estuary so future generations will be able to live again like Floridians once did.